Good morning. I'm Herb Magidson, a friend of Jeannie's for more than 40 years. On behalf of the family, the Kemble family, I want to welcome all of you to this truly celebration of Jeannie's life. We very much appreciate the opportunity for so many of her dear friends to be here. Thanks for coming. As we look around the room, we can really marvel at how many friends Jeannie had with so many diverse interests. It makes us realize how varied and diverse her interests were, and how she was able to earn the respect and gratitude of so many people from so many different walks of life. We all have one thing in common, that we touched Jeannie's life in significant ways, and she, in turn, certainly touched and enhanced our lives. So today we're going to share some of Jeannie's passions, both personal and professional. Jeannie had a fire in her belly as no one else I ever met. And we're going to hear about her personal passions for her kids, her family, her friends, and the animals she loved. Professionally, we're going to be reminded of what drove her life. You have a list of speakers and the order of their presentations. But before we do that, I'm very happy to introduce Jeannie's younger brother, Grover, and his good friend, Hap Noble. And let me tell you just before they begin that one of the last things I remember when we were at the hospital was Grover playing his guitar, and the head nurse was dancing and Jeannie was singing, and it was just a special moment. So I'm happy to call on Grover and Hap to give you a little of Jeannie's background as part of the family.
Thank you very much, Herb. My buddy Hap and I are going to sing some old gospel tunes. Most of these tunes I learned as a kid, listening to Harry Belafonte records. My sister was a big fan of Harry Belafonte and a number of other great folk singers, Burl Ives, the Kingston Trio. So I grew up listening to these tunes, and she had a room in the attic above mine, and she would play the stereo quite loud, and I could hear her dancing up there to these tunes. So I'm asking, this is a medley of a number of tunes sung by Harry Belafonte, some are old gospel tunes I'm sure you know, and I'm asking that you might sing along, because she would appreciate that. We had some great sing-alongs over the years, and I know she would love to hear you all sing. Oh, when the saints marching in, oh, when the saints go marching in, let me hear you. Oh, how I want to be in that number, when the saints go marching in, when they gather round the throne, when they gather round the throne. Come on, John. Oh, how I want you to be in that number, when they gather round the throne. I don't lay down my burden where? Down by the riverside, down by the river. study. I ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study that war no more. That old time religion, give me that old time religion. Old time religion, it's good enough for me. It was good for the Hebrew children. It was good for the Hebrew children. It was good for the Hebrew children. It's good enough for, let me hear it, children. Joshua took the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua took the battle of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down. You may talk about the men of Gideon, you may talk about the men of Saul, but there ain't nothing like the Lord Joshua and the battle of Jericho. Your turn. Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Your turn. I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Here's one by Burl Ives. I'm just a poor, wayfaring stranger traveling through this world of woe, but there's no sickness or no danger in that bright world to which I go. I'm going there to see my mother. I'm going there, no more to Rome. I'm just a going over Jordan. I'm just a going over home. This train is bound to go. 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 This train don't carry no gamblers. This train don't carry no gamblers. This train don't carry no gamblers, no crap shooters, no midnight ramblers. This train don't carry no gamblers. This train don't let nobody turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Don't let nobody turn me round. Gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom's land. In this your land, this land is my land. Come on. California, city of Highland, California, city of California. This land was made for you and me. As I was walking down the highway, I saw above me an endless skyway. saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me. Your turn. Hey. This light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Come on. This light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. For the union movement, I'm gonna let it shine. Come on. The union movement, I'm gonna let it shine. For the union movement, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. For the AFT, for the AFT, come on. I'm gonna let it shine. For the AFT, I'm gonna let it shine. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Last one. For Eugenia Kemble, I'm gonna let it shine. For Eugenia Kemble, I'm gonna let it shine. Everybody. For Eugenia Kemble, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Let me hear. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Oh, let it shine.
I'm Bernie Bond. Eugenia Kemble knew that I hated public speaking, and for years she made me do it anyway. So I can't help but think that she's laughing somewhere right now. I told Vicki and Helen that last night I dreamed that I forgot this speech at home and had to turn around and go back for it. And when I found it again, that Ginny had made notes on it. We have gathered here to pay tribute to a remarkable woman who lived a remarkable life. We lost her way too soon. Eugenia was brilliant and beautiful, with an outrageous sense of humor, a sharp wit, and at times an even sharper tongue. She was wonderful. She lived a life of passion and purpose and accomplishment, but with a strange propensity to second-guess herself. She doubted her intelligence and her choices and herself. But learning from her mentors, Al Shanker and Bayard Rustin, she tried to surround herself, both in her private and her professional life, with people she trusted to always tell her the truth. People who felt free to argue with her and question her assumptions. And she always tried to listen with an open mind. Well, okay, maybe not at first. But she usually came back a day or two later with agreement or more questions or additional arguments. It helped to hone her thinking and instill wisdom. She was tenacious and dedicated and smart. AFT President Randy Weingarten once called her a force of nature, which Jeannie left reeling for days. Lane Kirkland called her that woman, as in, Al, keep that woman away from me. Al Shanker used to her as his right hand. trusting her enough to build an apparatus that would be capable of carrying the AFT's intellectual and educational voice. As many of you know, Jeannie began working for Al just a few years out of college, beginning her career in 1967 as a reporter for the newspaper of the United Federation of Teachers in New York City. About a year after she started, she was sent out to write a story on anti-Semitism in the Ocean Hill-Brownsville strike. So she went out and interviewed a bunch of teachers, then wrote a story saying that things weren't as bad as had previously been reported. She said that Al had a fit and gave her a thorough dressing down. With the expectation that she was going to be fired, she attempted to quit, but Al wouldn't hear of it. Instead, he said, "How about if we do this? We'll do a feature on the editorial page. I'll write what I think, and then you can write an answer to me." She was shocked. It had taught her a lot about leadership and what that entailed. Al wasn't interested in surrounding himself with a bunch of yes men and yes women, and in the end, neither was Jeannie. It also marked the beginning of a lifelong mentorship and eventually a very close friendship. Jeannie loved Al and his wife Edie and considered them part of her extended family. So it came to as no great surprise when Al asked Jeannie to move to Washington, D.C. to work as a special assistant after he was elected to the presidency of the National AFT in 1974. In that position, she helped Al remake the AFT into an organization that would strive to fulfill its members' professional aspirations, as well as to improve the conditions of work. She conceived and raised funding both to create the union's main professional development effort for teachers, the Educational Research and Development Program, and to start the AFT's professional magazine, The American Educator, both of which she managed for a number of years. She also revamped the AFT's annual Quality Educational Standards in Teaching, the Quest Conference, now Teach, and helped Shanker spearhead the creation of the union's Educational Issues Department, Research Department, and International Affairs Department. In 1983, on Al's recommendation, AFL-CIO President Lane Kirkland named Jeannie to serve as the AFL-CIO's representative to the Democracy Program, a coalition effort that included the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and the AFL-CIO, which recommended that Congress establish the National Endowment for Democracy, or NED. In fact, Jeannie was the one who researched the European political foundations and Stiftungs that the NED was modeled upon, and who wrote up recommendations on what could and couldn't be translated into the American context. In 1984, Jeannie was named the executive director of the AFL-CIO's Free Trade Union Institute, which used NED and USAID funds to support union efforts to build democracy and democratic institutions, most notably through its backing of free trade unions around the world, including the Solidarity Union in Poland. In fact, AFL-CIO became Solidarity's main financial supporter from its inception in the fall of 1980 until a decade later when Solidarity-backed candidates were elected to take over the Polish government. It was around this time that I moved to Washington and first met Jeannie. I remember that my first impression was that she was incredibly intense, very smart, and hysterically funny. I remember the first time I left a message on her home phone. The so-called greeting made me laugh. "No one is here. I don't need to tell you what to do. Leave a message if you want to." The next time I saw her, I told her that I wasn't sure if she was trying to scare people out of leaving a message or threatening them to do so. She wouldn't say. There was a drastic change after her two beautiful daughters were adopted. Marie Eugenia, or Sheni, whom she adopted from Guatemala in 1986, and Sarah Luisa, whom she adopted from El Salvador in 1988. She loved you both fiercely, and you made her so much happier. I remember thinking it was symbolic when she changed her phone greeting to a simple, "Hello, you've reached the Kembles, please leave a message." I'm not sure that Shani and Sarah even know why their mother decided to walk away from the Free Trade Union Institute just when her job in democracy promotion was beginning to bear fruit in Poland and the rest of Eastern Europe, in the former Soviet Union, in South Africa, in Chile, and many other countries in the world. Her primary motivation was that she wanted to spend more time with her girls, and she couldn't see how she could do that with the increased travel demands of the job. She went back to AFT, where Al asked her to build the Educational Issues Department into a force to be reckoned with, and she did. And when she needed to travel, she took her girls with her to each and every event that she could. They came with her to every AFT convention when she worked at the AFT, and even after, when she had founded the Albert Shanker Institute. She took them along to every out-of-town speaking engagement when they were out of school. She took them to France in 2002 when we arranged a study trip on early childhood education. She took them whitewater rafting and to a ranch in Colorado to visit her friends, the Jessups. She took them to Egypt to visit her friend Hebra El-Shazli and her family. And every summer, she took them to her second home on a quiet lake in Maine. She wanted to be with them and enjoyed showing them the world. After retirement from the Shanker Institute, Jeannie bought an additional home in Fort Valley, Virginia, where she could be close to her children and grandchildren and to her dear friend, Helen Adams. She quickly became an active member of the Shenandoah County Democratic Party and was elected chair of its Education Committee, where she was recognized for her efforts to improve school funding and enhance the quality of public education in the county. She became a leader of the Parents Alliance for schools. These were the schools that her grandchildren would attend, and she wanted to make sure that they were as good as they could possibly be. Jeannie is predeceased by her former husband, Jervis Anderson, a staff writer for The New Yorker for 30 years and a leading chronicler of African American life and history, and her beloved brother, Richard Penn Kemble. She is survived by her daughters, Sarah and Sheni, and her sister Sally, and her brother Grover, her 6 grandchildren, and all of us. I will miss her forever.
I don't think I can match everything that Bernie said. Thanks. I'm Sally. Thank you for being here. First, for me, it wasn't supposed to be this way. I was the oldest of 4. I was 6 years old, starting first grade, and I can still hear my grandmother answering a call from the hospital and telling me, "You have a little sister, Eugenia Kemble." Through our lives, we tended to assume that I would be the first to depart and that Jeannie and the others would speak at my funeral. Yet here I am. 2 of my younger siblings, Penn and Jeannie, are gone. I am now here with you to mourn Jean's passing and celebrate her life. I've been asked to say a few words. A few words don't do Jeannie justice. That's already obvious. One could write a book about her. I will share some anecdotes from our common past and a few generalities in an inadequate attempt to sum her up. Young Jeannie from the beginning had many interests, as has been said. She was a fortunate child born into a middle-class educated family, healthy, very bright, talented, and beautiful. As children growing up in the country, we shared a love of animals. I remember the assertive tomboy, then the high school scholar athlete, straight A's, editor of her yearbook, a 4-H member horsewoman doing barrel racing and raising a lamb. She was a whiz on the flying rings. Her parents and her grandparents were proud. Later, as a college sophomore, she founded a tutorial program for underprivileged neighborhood children. She then studied in the Philippines and with a friend journeyed around the world, a trip that included Nepal and the Soviet Union when she was 20. With this lucky start in life, her successful youth, and the attention it earned her, Jean might have become arrogant and narcissistic. On the contrary, when Jean was in high school, I was exploring Christian orthodoxy. Penn in college paraded his atheism. We were all independent thinkers, and Jean decided she was a humanist. She subscribed to a humanist magazine. Penn at the time mocked me for believing in the Christian God, but he really criticized Jean, saying in a disparaging way, "How can you be a humanist? Humanists worship people." But Jeannie stuck to her guns. In time, we kids modified our ideological rough edges and recognized that we had good core values in common. Jeannie never worshiped people, but she cared about them. In the 60s, Penn, the condescending big brother, was to lead Jeannie into a circle of those who lived to advance the rights of common working people and the value of education for all. With these premises, her remarkable professional career was launched and continued. On, so many interests, so many activities. Her commitment to labor unions, educational issues, that I think was a unit that she headed at one point in the AFT. Her commitment to democratic enlightenment, her world travel for those causes. Her lovely properties in Georgetown and Maine, where we had so many great vacations, and then in rural Virginia, always her cats, dogs, and horses. But for her, all this was not enough. In her early 40s, after her divorce from Jervis Anderson, she felt unfulfilled without children. She knew something of Central America from some political activities, and as you know, decided to adopt 2 baby girls whose underprivileged parents could not take care of them. Jeannie simply delighted in raising Shenny and Sarah and enriching their lives. I was a close witness. The girls, in turn, adored her. Their devotion to her during her last illness was impressive, and her passing a great blow. They deserve our comfort and support now and in the future. And she was a loyal, stimulating, and loving sister. Close to Penn in her youth, she gained some independence, but continued to work with him and be inspired and much respected by him. She was with him at the moment of his death and acted to help fulfill his legacy. In her beginnings as a youthful executive director, she bossed and mentored Grover by turns. He remembers that well. She influenced his music by exposing him to the gospel folk, some of which you've heard today, the haunting songs of Joan Baez. He comforted her during her last illness by singing and getting her to sing with him. We sisters were somewhat different, I being contemplative, she being an activist, but we shared a common past and reinforced and complemented each other. She was always my best friend, there when I needed her. Without much thought, we had looked forward to continuing this relationship as we got really old. So much energy and drive she had. About 2 years ago, she said to me, "I don't feel old at all, I feel young, I have lots to do." Alas, the irony. About May 2007, she wrote us breezily about some health problems, joking, "Well, we all gotta go sometime." Later, when she knew that something serious was wrong, she told us, "You know me, I won't go gentle into that good night." With that spirit, she tirelessly researched what she could, opted for aggressive treatment, and endured the shocking, unexpected ordeal which followed. Late in her illness, when she could still talk, she told the hospice doctor in my presence, "It's not right, it's not right, I want to live." It's not right. It still sinks into me in stages that she isn't simply absent, she's gone. I find myself reflexively ready to email her discussing the family news, the political turmoil we're in, like the latest on Kavanaugh. Then I catch myself. Rest in peace, Jeannie. I must go on into my old age without you. If I am lucky, the memories will remain. They will surely remain with your daughters, your grandchildren, and your son-in-law, Cassidy, and all the rest of you who have your own recollections. You set a splendid example. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay. I'm really nervous, so excuse the shakiness. I'm gonna say mine first, and I'm gonna say my sister's afterwards, okay? Okay. We were up in Maine this last time to spread my mom's ashes. So that was really hard for my family. Excuse me. This birthday, I saw you, Ben, and Nellie as loons, as it was a sunny day. And that night, as we said our goodbyes, by releasing you in the main lake, we saw a loon again, in a sign of sorts, as you were to tell my sister and I, you guys will be okay. Thank you for bringing me to this place where I wanted to be let go. In that moment, I felt your presence, and I was somewhat at ease, because I remembered all the times that we had there when we were up in Maine. Robert, when he would go fishing. Grover, when he would play his guitar. My grandmother, when she had her 80th birthday. When my kids ran around and could understand what that was. Just everything. So, as my mom would say to me, lobster's up. So, that's from me. Do you want to read this or do you want me to? Okay, no, it's okay. My sister wrote this. I have always been in awe of my mother's intelligence, kindness and passion, and bravery as a young child. I remember walking and cartwheeling down the hall at the AFT. Even then, I could tell that her coworkers had the utmost respect for her, and they would come to her for advice. I have been so privileged to be her daughter. She has given my sister and I the endless opportunities that we would have never otherwise had. I will miss her as a mother, as a best friend, and one of the most unique role models ever. We love you, Mommy. I need this.
Good morning. Unlike so many people in this room, I did not have the honor to know Jeannie for a very, very long time. But the short time I did know Jeannie, who became my best friend and the only friend I had in Washington, D.C., she was intense, loving, brilliant, and a true, true friend. She was always there when you needed her. She listened, she cared, and she was a fighter to the very end. I had the opportunity to meet Jeannie via my husband, who is on the Albert Schenker board. And I attended the meetings for him because he couldn't get back and forth. And Jeannie and I just developed a relationship because we were honest, always honest. And that's what real friendship is based on, honesty. When I became a certified teacher in New York City and an administrator, I was inspired by Albert Schenker. Albert Schenker was on our TV all the time because he was protesting, he was talking, he was on the David Susskind show, he was on every show, and my mother followed education like her heartbeat. So when I had the opportunity to meet Jeannie and realize that she was part of that select group of people, as many people in this room were, of the Albert Schenker people, I was like, this is it. I had finally met Albert Schenker and all that he inspired and how great education could really be. For me, teaching in New York City and special education, everything went smoothly till we elected a mayor that was far from being pro-New York City, much more pro, at this point, Trump, because he represents everything that Trump says and everything is right when he's talking. But when he was mayor of New York City, he slashed the budgets for special education, started the whole you don't need to be certified, and Jeannie and I talked a lot about that because our passion was education and trying to make everyone's lives better. As a fighter in the civil rights movement, Jeannie knew exactly what was going on in the inner city, and we used to laugh when we listened to the dribble of education reformers who said that they know education. They know how to do it. They know a zip code doesn't matter. And we know in reality we were letting these children march off to years of misery because we weren't talking enough to try to change everything. Years before President Obama said, we are the people that we are waiting for, Jeannie and her group and Sandy and Albert Schenker were the people we were waiting for. They were the people making a difference in our communities and our lives. Jeannie was a person of the world. I knew she had traveled the world when she was young, but she was a person, a real person of the world. She could start a conversation with you. She knew how to talk to people. She knew how to embrace people. And she knew how to make people feel that they were important, because we are all important. And Jeannie just made you feel comfortable. We had the opportunity to really know Jeannie on so many multiple levels, from the dog walking to me calling her place a farm because she had all these animals, and getting in the car and all this dog hair was all over the place, and to feeding the horses, to going to the wrong Starbucks to meet for coffee. It was a wonderful ride. I will miss her saying, hey, you. Brilliant people never fade away. They are always with you. I will miss Jeannie, and I feel for the family. And I know how much you miss her. But I know I can hear in my head when I pick up a newspaper article and start laughing, and I can hear Jeannie say, well, it probably should have been this way or that way or another way. But she was very important. And I know for everybody in this room, she was very, very important to us all. So I wish her the best, wherever she is, because I know she's standing at the gates waiting for all of us and telling us how to live our lives and how to be better people. So thank you for letting me speak on it, because I couldn't have gone today without Jeannie.
So Jeannie was one of my favorite people in all the world. And there were so many reasons for that. She was an incredibly impressive woman, and we all know that. But I was asked to talk about her sense of humor, and that's good, because for me, what I remember most about her was her sense of humor. This was a funny, witty woman, didn't take herself seriously, could give and take, and I lived to make her laugh. And she had that fantastic laugh, that joyful trumpet of a laugh. And I was thinking that this humor really kind of started from day one. So when I applied to work at the Shanker Institute, this was 2010, the job listing for my position said, and I'm not joking, this is a direct quote, "Doomsday sense of humor, a plus." Doomsday sense of humor, a plus. So I have to prepare for this interview. I don't know any of the Shanker people. Everybody says they're a bunch of weirdos, which is totally true. And I had to go in there, with my writing samples, I had my questions, prepared and my answers, and then I had my doomsday sense of humor. I didn't know what that meant at the time, and then I started working for Jeannie, and I figured it out. I always used to tell Jeannie that I was going to start the Eugenia Kemble Institute, which would be dedicated to the themes of education, labor, democracy, and repressed frustration. And our first research project, I told her, would be an analysis of her 347,000 unread emails on her phone, because I know most of them were from me. I used to send her email messages just to see if she was paying attention. Like I once sent her, "Hey, Jeannie, I'm going to borrow Al Shanker's Presidential Medal of Freedom from the boardroom to wear on a date this weekend. And if I don't hear otherwise from you, I'll just assume it's okay." And she, of course, immediately replied, "You have a date?" And it wasn't just the email, it was always the hilarious phone issues. After she retired, I would send her regular text messages, just a joke, or ask her out for a drink, or just to say hi. She never quite had her settings together, and she would always respond with that wonderful, "Who is this?" And she did it once, twice, and finally the fourth time I said, "It's Ted Nugent." And she replied, "I'd actually prefer him over you, Matt." And by the way, if you're interested in helping to start the Eugenia Kemble Institute, you can make a donation at don'tfundme.com. Jeannie was a mentor to me. She used to ask me all the time, "Matt, what do you want to do with your career? What do you really want to do with your career?" As if there was no chance I was on the right track. And I would say something like, "Jeannie, I just want to be your bodyguard and personal fitness consultant." And she would say, "You're too much of a coward to be my bodyguard." She always pushed me to do better. If I was on some panel at some event or conference or something, she was there in the audience, not just to support me, but she was there to ask me a question, and a very difficult question. She would say something like, "I think both the panelists are wrong, but I'm curious as to what they think about which one of them is more wrong. And if DeCarlo says it's not him, I have a follow-up." I learned so much from Jeannie as a mentor. I learned not only to respect people who disagree with you politically, but to pity them, really. She taught me that at all times, one should either scowl or smile, because poker faces are for communists. I learned to turn the other cheek, because otherwise it's vulnerable when you punch the person back. She taught me about relationships. I learned that you can catch more flies with honey, but who the hell wants flies? And she always taught that you should surround yourself, in her case, hire the greatest, most talented, smartest people you can find, but then let them know they're not really that great, Jeannie had this hilarious thing about always pointing out people that she had hired, I hired him, I hired her. So like the AFT flowchart was like Shanker hired Jeannie, and then Jeannie hired everybody else at AFT, and it was just like everyone, it's like Samuel Gompers would come, I hired him as a consultant, He had a real great doomsday sense of humor, that guy. But, she was very proud of the people she hired, and frankly, I'll let that stand without objection. Her role as my mentor was one of the reasons why Bernie used to call Jeannie my work mother. And I think this was true, though sometimes in the sense of the mother bird who pushes her chick off the cliff to see if it will fly or plummet to its death, and watches on less with concern than sheer curiosity. I once went out to dinner with Jeannie and my real mother, and this was a very weird, long night. My most clear recollection of it is like one of them would say something to the other, and the other one would go, "I know, right?" It was like they were both apologizing to each other for me, like I wasn't there. No, that's my fault. No, that's my fault. I let him get away with that for too long. And she was a very nurturing work mother. I can still hear the sweet, wonderful things she used to say to me, such as, "How are you really? How are you?" Or, "I miss seeing you every day." Or, "Get out." Or, "For all the education you have, it's amazing how stupid you act sometimes." Or, "No, really, get out." Get out was definitely the best. She said get out to me one time when I visited her in the hospital. Now, in fairness, I had been there for a couple of hours, and but just all of a sudden, she was just like, "Okay, get out." You, you're fine. You can stay. You, out. And I think that's going to be the slogan of the new institute. It's going to be the Eugenia Kemble Institute. Get out. And the thing is that I didn't want to get out, and I never wanted to get out. From the very beginning, it was just to spend time with her, just to stay a little longer with her in the Schenker boardroom where she worked because her office had been completely taken over by her revolutionary vertical filing system for papers. I just wanted to stay a little, maybe if I was lucky, get called a schmuck, or make fun of her replacement hip and say how it was going to be rejected because it couldn't stand her anymore. Just anything, and I still don't want to get out. And now she can't make me. And I would do anything just to hear that laugh one more time. For all she accomplished and what a unique person she was, I will remember the laughing most of all. And I wrote this in the program, but I want to say it again because it's, I think, really important. And one of the things she always said to me was how much she wished I had met Al Schenker and known Al Schenker, how he was, he died when I was in college, and how he was brilliant and inspiring. And I think that that's, true, but, I'm just glad that I knew Eugenia Kemble. Thanks. Thank you.
Eugenia Kemble, Jean Kemble, Jeannie Kemble. But for me, and Rover and Shenny and Sarah, when we shared a moment in the hospital, Jeannie said quite rightly, Phil always calls me Eugenius. And I do that because, as so many of you said, she's one of the smartest people that I ever met. A fact that she frequently reminded me of. But smartness, intelligence, wit, also a bit of, to be truthful about it, megalomania from time to time. Tell you a story, I was, along with Jeannie and so many of you here, part of that crew that just had the honor and pleasure and excitement of working with Al Schenker. When Jeannie came to town, to Washington, as his assistant for educational issues, around that time, he asked me to become involved in the organizing work of the AFT. And one of my responsibilities, it wasn't particularly exciting, it was kind of oversee a program of funding of our local affiliates called formula funding. And the first, so I started getting my feet wet around that. And And then I get a note from Jeannie. Hey, Phil, Colorado didn't get their formula assistance this month. They missed their $360. And what gives? I chalk that up to, her constant desire for perfection all over the place. And then, of course, Jeannie was always straight, honest, and though sometimes I wish she wasn't so vocal about it. But like many of us here that lived and worked with Al in those days, we were part of a revolution. A meaningful voice for teachers, participated in the building of the modern AFT. It was a time of strife and struggle and great excitement, a lot of fun and a lot of argument. And I know that all of us, Jeannie included, we could not think of any other place that we would rather be. First there's the basic battle for a democratic right of representation of voice in the workplace, the dignity that comes with meeting your employer as an equal, a collective bargaining agreement, but at the same time, being at the center of a fight to realize the true vision of what a quality public school system, public education should be. We all know that the rich can take care of themselves. But for working families, their children, public education is the engine of opportunity to gain, develop knowledge, talent, skills so that they can advance. Also learn, develop a thoughtfulness, an ability to participate from a base of knowledge in this democracy. Be side by side with kids of all kinds, races, creeds, immigrant families, lessons for living, and getting along, really the fabric of society. And maintaining support for this system, recognizing where it was falling short, not being afraid to call that out, figuring out how it could be improved, and presenting ideas to decision makers and the public in a compelling way. That was Eugenius's work each and every day, all the time. For me, as part of the staff, and many others, Jeannie provided big picture guidance. I got organizing for collective bargaining, a union contract, wages, hours, and working conditions, voice, but that was really only part of the story. Our members were interested in a whole lot more. They had ideas of their own. They wanted respect for their knowledge. They wanted the public to understand their level of commitment and what public education should be and how it could be improved. They also wanted their union's help and support on these professional dimensions. And they wanted that support integrated into the mainstream of union activity, every bit as important as bread and butter items on a collective bargaining negotiations agenda. And that was the big picture that Jeannie in particular helped me, work with me and helped me understand, and for which I'll be forever grateful. It was always as well working with the broader labor movement and its supporters, and it meshed perfectly with Jeannie's worldview, the ongoing fight for a certain kind of society, one characterized by social and economic justice, respect for civil and human rights, democratic values, where there are decent jobs for all, quality education, quality health care, good housing, that's affordable, safe and a safe environment, safe and secure retirement, workers having real rights to organize. That was also part of the picture, quite obviously, as you've already heard. And Jeannie had a worldview. The connection in the international arena, recognizing the obligation to support democracy around the world, and of course the essential element of working to do everything we possibly could to support the development and nurturing and thriving of free trade union movements. So that was Jeannie, that was the AFT. That was, of course, the Free Trade Union Institute, and her last job in launching and administering the Albert Shanker Institute, making sure its direction and activities reflected all that Al stood for as an advocate for quality public education, a strong American labor movement, and democracy around the world. It's a long, long list of work and accomplishment. And even after her retirement, as has already been told to you, Ginny rolled up her sleeves and worked to build a Democratic Party in rural Virginia, and also was forever researching and sharing and commenting on articles of interest for all to share her ideas and her thoughts, and encouraging interaction and debate and discussion and conversation. I will cherish our monthly get-togethers halfway between where Jeannie lived and where I lived, and just meeting to talk about family, to talk about how we were doing, our history and our memories. I know, Jeannie, that we're all so proud of you. Cherish your friendship, and we'll certainly miss you.
For me, what is so fascinating about Jeannie Kemble, you feel the love from people that they have for her. You feel the closeness of family. And at the same time, you hear people talk about how incredibly tough she was, and she was. She was toughest on herself, by the way. And what's so fascinating to me is that this person who could be so incredibly tough and driven was able to give and receive such love, such personal things. How is it that people were drawn to her? Well, they were drawn to her because they understood her motives, because they believed in her commitment to democratic values, because they knew she cherished freedom for those less fortunate than she, and she was willing to fight tooth and nail for it. Because in the final analysis, she cared about people. And yes, it's true, Al Shanker, he loved it when she burst into his office. And she didn't walk into his office, she burst into his office. To tell him that he was wrong about this or that issue. She fought him tooth and nail, and he loved it. Because he knew, as we do, that she cared so much for others. Jeannie understood an essential truth of life, that freedom is the most delicate of human aspirations. It is not the norm in this world. She believed that those who live in freedom have a special obligation to those who do not. That the quest for freedom is the never-ending battle, and that it is never and will never be guaranteed. One of the most interesting things about Jeannie is that just as she was ever ready to engage those with whom she disagreed, she was willing to be engaged by those who challenged her. And Matt DiCarlo, who you've seen has his own hard-driving personality, would challenge her again and again, and she just loved it. The truth, Matt, is that Jeannie saw parts of herself in you. And by the way, Nat, when I die, you will never be asked to speak at my... So we lost more than a friend. We lost a freedom fighter who understood the very fragile nature of freedom. And I think Jeannie will be happy that I leave you with a quote from John Stuart Mill about war and freedom. Quote, "War is an ugly thing, but it is not the ugliest of things. The person who has nothing for which he is willing to fight, nothing which is more important than his own personal safety, is a creature who has no chance of being free unless made and kept so by the exertions of better people than himself." End quote. Jeannie fought like 10 lions for freedom, and in her mind, it was never enough. I used to tell Jeannie that she was really Jewish for two reasons. First, she always worried about everything. She was a vintage Orthodox warrior. And second, that she cared about everything, really cared about everything that was dear to her, about the ordinary worker, the downtrodden, the underdog, the forgotten. We were really lucky to have her with us. And I'll end by saying with the greatest affection, if there is a God, watch out, Jeannie is coming. Now, let me say that we would be more than happy to hear from anyone who wishes to speak about Jeannie on Jeannie's behalf. So this would be the time to do that if you wish. And if you don't, I have a backup. Bernie asked me if I would, I'm sorry. Oh, good. Somebody? Oh, Edie. Thank you, Edie.
I think Jenny and I are both here because we did know Jeannie in many different degrees, and Jenny more recently, last 10 years perhaps, and she had tremendous impact certainly upon Jenny, and I've learned so much today hearing from all of you about Jeannie and what she accomplished and what kind of person she was. I was outside of most of the workings of the UFT and AFT, aside from when we started the union, and was very active then. But I was a homebody. I was working also and doing things that Al agreed with me were important to do in my work at CUNY, working with dropout students, trying to lead them to better lives. But I really just wanted to say a few words here. First, what I've learned about Jeannie is enormous. She was an impressive, incredible person to be able to balance all that she did, and I know what Al did in terms of balancing some kind of a home life and family with everything that she did and that he did. She doted on him, and he loved her and depended on her. And I learned about Jeannie when Al said, this gal came in, and he had a way of sizing people up very quickly. She came in and, oh, she's going to be with the union. She's good. And he just let her go. The ideas would flow, and he would turn it over to her, and he did that with other people, I'm sure you remember. If you were good, you could just go, and he wouldn't be standing there and nitpicking and micromanaging. He'd let you do what you knew was right and that you knew was for the right reasons. And Jeannie enjoyed having that kind of freedom to be able to work for someone like that, and he certainly appreciated everything that she did on her own because of her own convictions that you've heard about today. There's one thing, though, I do want to say is I'm most impressed by what Jeannie as a mother was able to accomplish. First of all, her devotion to her daughter and to her grandchildren was enormous. She was running all over the world. She was running all kinds of programs, mentoring people, doing really wonderful things that the world would recognize. But she never forgot that she had these children that she wanted so much. And she stood by them through thick and thin and let them know how much she loved them and her grandchildren, every one of them. And I would get together with Jeannie, and we wouldn't talk so much about the AFT or the UFT. We'd talk about the kids, and we talk about some of the struggles that we were having with ourselves and with our children. And we advised each other, and I remember some of those conversations. They were very meaningful. And I just want Shenny and Sarah to know that there isn't anybody in the world that Jeannie loved more, and that she gave herself to you as much as she could, as much as she gave to the union in her own way. She maintained a wonderful family life for you and a future for you. And I appreciate what she did with me and for me. And I certainly appreciate her love for Al. She just was enormous about Al. So thank you.
Sarah and Shenna, you brought up a real strong memory for me when you were talking about running around the AFT as a kid, because when I was a kid, I used to run around the UFT offices, and there were some offices where we knew we shouldn't go because people were too busy, and there were others where we knew the door was always open and somebody would be, I'm going to say there were 4 people where we could go, and there was somebody who was very warm and opening, and Jeannie was always one of them. There is something about, there is, in the union, people call each other brothers and sisters, and there is a sense of family that naturally happens, I think, when people work together. And I know that we certainly feel that the people who my dad worked with are part of an extended family. I really had nothing to do with the union. I, had a basic understanding of things, I'd say, until a few years ago when I started doing some organizing, and I was invited to speak at the Shanker Institute, which was really I was terrified. But I remember Jeannie afterwards coming up to me and saying, "You'd make a great organizer." And that meant so much to me from, somebody who had worked with my dad. Jeannie was also so incredibly wonderful when my mom had been through some struggles with her health in the past few years. And Jeannie was always calling, would come to visit. We're just so grateful for that. And she guided me in a lot of ways into the work that I'm doing now. I consulted a lot with her, and I'm so grateful for her. And I'm so sorry that we have to be here today. And there's always going to be some wisdom that I will be referring to that she has given me. Thank you.
This has been a very, very beautiful service, I just want to say, and I want to thank and in a way congratulate everyone who spoke with such emotion and love and humor and a sense of values. I'm just very happy that I had the privilege of being here to be with all of you. My name is Carl Gershman. I realize that I've known Jeannie, or knew Jeannie, over 51 years. It's really quite amazing. What happened was that a long time ago, I was trying to figure out what to do with my life, and I wrote to somebody at the League for Industrial Democracy. It was Paul Feldman. And, when I was over a Thanksgiving vacation in college and in graduate school in 1967, I came into New York and saw Paul, and he said, "Well, you got to go over to the UFT." This was Thanksgiving '67, and I went over to the UFT, and who was the first person I met but Jeannie. And I remember just being so impressed and actually intimidated, because here was this young woman who wrote these long, detailed articles, had such clear views on everything. I was just really a confused young person at the time, and I was very, very impressed. And of course, I didn't know what they were really doing. What they were really doing was they were recruiting me to the movement. And so I got to meet a lot of people because they were working me over. And I got drawn into the movement, which is really what it was. Even if you weren't an actual member of the Socialist Party and so forth, it was all, a movement. And it was an amazing time. Ocean Hill-Brownsville right at the beginning, and then the faction fight with the Harringtonites and everything. It was just immensely dramatic. And I got to know and work with and feel very close to some amazing people like Al and Bayard and Paul and Sandy and Penn and Jeannie and Max, and you can't forget Yetta, and Donnie and Sammy and Tom, and one after another. What a community. We were so small, and it was, we were sort of involved in a little world, mostly in New York. We thought it was extremely important, but little did we know at the time how important it was. I mean, it's only when you grow up and you go out into the big world, you realize then how special this was. In any event, I personally, people then moved on. And when Bernie had been talking about the NED, that's when I got drawn into a later stage of this thing. Al was a founding member, and I was sort of brought down to come in because they all thought it might be a disaster. Because how did anybody else know politics aside from our little core? And in any event, so this happened, and I was brought into it, and there were disasters, at the very beginning. I can even remember having come down, and maybe it was just a month or month and a half after I came down, it looked like we were going to be destroyed. And I remember Al and Jeannie taking me out for dinner to sort of calm me down and reassure me that there would be a future. And indeed there was. We've continued, and even now today, we continue to work. I continue to work with the Schenker Institute, and then a few years ago, 5 years ago, we created a Youth Fellows program named after Penn, and Jeannie was part of that as well, the Kemble Youth Fellows, which is really a remarkable thing. And I think, when I think about today and all this history, this is quite a remarkable community that we're all a part of. It's a community based both on values and institutions, and friendship, of course. And for that reason, I think it's going to endure in its own way, even if some of the institutions that we've been a part of no longer exist, and some of the people no longer exist. I think because of this intimate connection between values and institutions and friendship and community, this community that we're a part of has a future. And Jeannie, of course, was an immensely valued and important part of that community.
I speak today for Velma, who had a particularly close political and personal relationship with Jeannie, and for the A. Philip Randolph Institute. We consider Jeannie a part of our family. Her former husband, Jervis Anderson, wrote the definitive biography of A. Philip Randolph, the Institute's co-founder, the nation's greatest Black labor leader, the founder of the most historically significant union for Black workers, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, the father of the modern civil rights movement, and the initiator of the great August 28, 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. We shared with Jeannie a philosophy of political, social, and economic change best articulated by A. Philip Randolph, who said, "Salvation for a race, nation, or class must come from within. Freedom is never granted, it is won. Justice is never given, it is exacted. Freedom and justice must be struggled for by the oppressed of all lands and races. And the struggle must be continuous, for freedom is never a final fact, but a continually evolving process to higher and higher levels of human, social, economic, political, and relationships." We believe that Jeannie was inspired by A. Philip Randolph's simple but profound credo in her work, a credo that goes something like this: "At the banquet table of nature, there are no reserved seats. You get what you can take, and you keep what you can hold. If you can't take anything, you won't get anything. And if you can't hold anything, you won't keep anything. And you can't take anything without organization." I close with this thought. As we celebrate the life, work, and achievements of Eugenia Kemble, we are encouraged by her example to keep on with the keeping on and find a way to continue to participate in the ongoing struggle for racial equality and economic justice. Thank you.
thank all of you. We're going to have Grover and Al give us a folk medley, then Jeannie's daughters would like to make some final remarks, and we hope you will be able to, after that, join us for lunch. Grover?
Okay, thank you so much for your help today and for everybody else for coming out this afternoon. Especially I'd like to thank Jean's daughters, Shani and Sarah, and my great friends Bernie, Vicky, Helen, Edie, and my sister Sally for the care and support we gave during this difficult period in Jean's life. My dear sister Jeannie has passed away. She had a long, difficult, complicated illness, and she fought very bravely to the end. Jean was a wonderful sister to me, very supportive of all my musical, artistic efforts over the years. She was a strong, bright-spirited woman who championed civil rights, women's rights, and the union causes. I'll always picture her galloping her horse down a long field where we lived in Morris Plains, and listening closely as she played her many Joan Baez and Harry Belafonte records loudly from her attic bedroom when we were kids. The poignant lyrics, the melodies, and messages of those special songs greatly shaped and influenced both mine and her interests and values over the many years. Well, Jean could be somewhat of a bossy sister. Was she ever that way with any of you? But truthfully, I could be a bratty, annoying kid brother a lot of the time. We laughed about those times during her illness. When I recalled with her at the time, she beat up the neighborhood bully who was bothering me. She bloodied his nose and put him in a headlock. My mother was horrified, but I thought she was cool. Well, I looked up to her, and I learned so many things about the right way to do things. And to think about things. Many fond memories and sister-brother memories will stay with me forever. I'd like to sing some songs now. I'm going to sing just 3 songs with Hal. The first one is a song that was done by Harry Belafonte. And when my sister brought Jervis Anderson home to meet the family, he was a very exquisitely good-looking Jamaican man. And I thought my sister married Harry Belafonte. She was going to marry him. He spoke so eloquently in that perfect Jamaican English accent. And of course, Jean and I knew all the old Harry Belafonte songs. And so we sang them at Christmas time. And I hope you sing this one. It's called Jamaica Farewell. Please sing along. Out on the way where the nights are gay and the sun shines gaily on the mountain top, I took a trip on a sailing ship, and when I reached Jamaica, I made a stop. But I
everywhere and the dancing girls swing to and fro. I must declare my heart is there, though I've been from Maine to Mexico. Well,
Sad to say, I'm on my way. Won't be back for many a day. My heart is down, my head is turning around. I have to leave a little girl in Kingston town. Out at the market, you can hear ladies cry while on their heads they beg. I keep rice so fish are nice, and the rum is fine any time of year or time. One more time. Sad to say, I'm on my way. Won't be back for many a day. My heart is down, my head's turning around. I had to leave a little girl in Kingston town. And I like to end with a couple songs. And these are suggested by Bernie. I'm happy to do them. These are old Union songs. I remember my sister did know them, and we did know them in the family. I had forgotten about them, but I think they're appropriate to do. I hope I can remember them. The first one is called The Union Maid. And I always think of my sister as the Union Maid. Let me teach you the chorus. The chorus goes like this. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the Union. I'm sticking to the Union. I'm sticking to the Union. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the Union. I'm sticking to the Union till the day I die. There once was a Union maid. She never was afraid of the goons and the gigs and the company fakes and the deputy sheriffs who made the raid. And when the Union was called, she went to the Union Hall. When the boys would come around, she always stood her ground. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking with the Union. I'm sticking with the Union. I'm sticking with the Union. Come on. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the Union. I'm sticking to the Union till the day I die. This Jeannie Kemble was wise to the tricks of the company spies. She'd take a dare and she didn't care. She always organized the guys. She always got her way. She always had her say. And she showed her cards, the Union cards. And then she'd say, oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the Union. I'm sticking to the Union. I'm sticking to the Union. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the Union. I'm sticking to the Union till the day I die. This one goes out to Shane and Sarah. Oh, you girls, you want to be free, just take a little tip from me. Get you a man who's a Union man and join the 21st century. 'Cause married life ain't hard, you got a Union card. The Union life is a happy life if you got a Union wife. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the Union. I'm sticking to the Union. I'm sticking to the Union. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the Union. I'm sticking to the Union till the day I die. One more. Here's the chorus. We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna gonna roll the Union on. We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the Union on. Your turn. We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the Union on. We're gonna roll, we're gonna roll, we're gonna roll the Union on. If the boss gets in the way, we're gonna roll right over him. We're gonna roll right over him. We're gonna roll right over him. If the boss gets in the way, we're gonna roll right over him. We're gonna roll right over him. We're gonna roll. We're gonna roll. We're gonna roll. We're gonna roll the Union on. We're gonna roll. We're gonna roll. We're gonna roll the Union on. If the governor gets in the way, we're gonna roll right over him. We're gonna roll right over him. We're gonna roll right over him. If the governor gets in the way, we're gonna roll right over him. We're gonna roll right over him. Let me hear it. We're gonna roll. We're gonna roll. We're gonna roll the Union on. We're gonna roll. We're gonna roll. We're gonna roll the Union on. If a senator gets in the way, we're gonna roll right over him. We're gonna roll right over him. We're gonna roll right over him. If a senator gets in the way, we're gonna roll right over him. We're gonna roll right over him. Let me hear it. We're gonna roll. We're gonna roll. We're gonna roll the Union on. We're gonna roll. We're gonna roll. We're gonna roll right over him. If the president gets in the way, we're gonna roll right over him. We're gonna roll right over him. We're gonna, let me hear it. If the president gets in the way, we're gonna roll right over him. We're gonna roll right over him. We're gonna roll. We're gonna roll. We're gonna roll right over him. We're gonna roll. We're gonna roll. We're gonna roll the Union on. One more time. We're gonna roll. We're gonna roll. We're gonna roll the Union on. We're gonna roll. We're gonna roll. We're gonna roll the Union on. Thank you so much.
We wanted to invite everyone for a lunch afterwards in the fellowship hall, but before we do so, we wanted to thank everyone that helped us with the memorial. Bernie helped us a lot, and Vicki, and our family, and Helen, and Herb, and we are just so grateful that you helped us organize this memorial. Mom would have loved it. And I just wanted to thank everyone for speaking and showing up today. She would have loved it. Thank you.